okay. Anyway, my name is Gadoni. I am, thank you. I am the community manager at AfriPods. AfriPods is a podcast hosting and distribution platform focused on the African storyteller. And we're building the largest library of African audio stories. Today, I am really excited to have as my guest, Gadoni Kimoyu, better known as Queen Gadoni in the streets, to have a conversation with me about storytelling. So join me in welcoming Gadoni. Hi, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. Guys, congratulations on having two Gadonis in your midst. This is like
Greatness.
the eclipse, you know?
Yeah.
It happens once every 1,000 years. Unless you are relatives, then it happens every family
Every
get
day.
together. So today we're going to have a conversation on storytelling. I invited Gadoni because she has done a lot of production, not only on stage, but also in television and a lot of other things. And I feel like she'd be an amazing person to share what things you should think about as a podcaster in storytelling. So I understand she's not a podcaster, but there's a lot we can learn from her. So my first question always is, introduce yourself to me like you would to someone who does not know who you are. So they've never heard about you. Who are you? Go.
Wow, that is so hard. That's such a hard question because there is not even one sentence that could say who I am in just a nutshell. But I'd like to say I like to think of myself as an entertainment change maker.
Okay.
Yes.
Tell us more.
So I don't think I have met any form of entertainment that I didn't change or I didn't know how to do.
Okay.
Yes, and I'm still growing into learning more. And actually, I was a podcaster before I was any other thing. I've podcasted in 2016, 2017.
Oh, so you're the OG podcaster.
Yes.
What did you used to podcast on?
I used to podcast for Trust Condoms, for a
Okay.
podcast called Kua True.
Okay.
Yes. So
what did you talk about?
obviously, responsible sex. I used to podcast for responsible sex, and the demographic I was talking to was people between the age of 20 to 26, and it was such a good time. And it was only 7 minutes an episode.
Oh, so cool.
Yeah.
Can we still find it somewhere?
Yes, you can. We're true on SoundCloud.
Wow, guys,
Yeah.
SoundCloud. Do you remember? Wow. How many people have their podcast on SoundCloud? Okay.
There's no shame. There's no shame in the game. We're the pioneers. They wouldn't work
She
if we
said,
didn't
if
crawl.
you're old, please put your hand up. Anyway, so I invited you to talk about storytelling, especially with the work I've seen with your Too Early for Birds. I know you've done a lot of other things, but that one, I think because I've been an audience member and I'm a fan, I felt like you're in a position to tell us or teach us about what storytelling could be like, and we can adopt it into podcasting. So I'm going to start with conceptualization of an idea. So what is it, in whichever place you have worked, what is the steps you go through, or what are the things you think through when you're trying to conceptualize a new idea? What is it that you need to think about when you're trying to think about a story or telling a story? Before you answer, for the people in the audience, when I say storytelling, I don't mean only narrative podcasts. I know a lot of the people here, you might be doing interviews, you might be a talk podcast like me and my sisters, whatever it is that you're doing, I think you'd be able to translate it into that, even if it's interviews or whatever it is. So conceptualization, what are the things we should consider?
So with Too Early for Birds, for example, the first idea, whatever the idea is, it first goes into research more than anything else. Because then from research, and the fact that Too Early for Birds is factual, historical Kenyan stories, it has to have very heavy research. So if we say we're telling the story of Wangari, for example, the first thing that happens is research. And research can take as long as 3 months, 6 months. Sometimes we're on stage and there's still more things that are being added to the production as we go. So the research really never stops, but it's the backbone of Too Early for Birds.
Okay, so how do you determine what part of research goes into telling the story? Because, I mean, we can learn where she was born, for example. I'll talk about like Tomboya, where we know his death is the thing everyone wanted to talk about. So what is it that makes you decide what part of his like love life you'll go into, or what part of like his political career you'll go into?
So for a lot of people and places that we decide to research on or tell stories on, we do our very best to make these places human, relatable. Even the politicians, even the big names, we try as much as possible to show you the other side that is not just books, lying to us on TV. Like they also have another life. They have children. They take them to school and all of that stuff. So it's very important to humanize them so that even when you tell other parts of their stories, they're relatable to the audience that you're telling them to.
Right, humanizing people. I don't like how to do that. Sometimes I'm just like, make them a monster. But I guess humanizing is important.
Yeah.
When you're doing research, what role does understanding who your target audience is play in that? Does it matter who your audience is? Because I feel like for podcasters, a lot of times before we start, we're like, who is it I'm trying to speak to? And then we build on that. Is that the same thing when you're trying to build your stories?
Yes and no, because Kenyan history is important to all of us. So if we've had an audience of people who are in their 70s, people who are in their late 70s, we've had an audience of people as young as 16. So really it goes across the board. It doesn't really matter because Kenyan history is Kenyan history. And if you have time to listen to it, what we do though is, because we know how boring history can be, and I mean, and I can attest from like high school and how history classes would be so boring. But the one thing we maximized on is to make sure that it's not a boring class. So in the midst of telling these stories, we put a lot of pop culture jokes. So if you're on the internet, if you're Kenyan, if there's something that trended that week before the show, you're gonna find it in the script and you can relate to it. So even as you learn something, you're still entertained. And in the process of that entertainment, you make sure never to forget that fact about your country. So it's a win.
Right, so
Yeah.
hiding history in TikTok. Okay, but then I feel like when you're saying, even though you have 16 to 70, is there a specific target audience that you think about? So like even the jokes, because I don't know that our parents, God bless them, would understand the joke from the week before. So is there a specific person as you're doing the research and picking even the relatability? Is there someone you think about?
It's 26 to 50. 26 to 50 also because affordability of buying tickets. So it's not just, this is the audience we're speaking to. It's the audience that if we say the tickets are 2,000 bob, for example, that's a person who can be able to buy those tickets. So we don't just blindly say, let's put it out for everybody. It's, this is the demographic. This is the demographic that also cares or would want to be entertained in this type of way. So let's do it like this and charge it like this because they can also afford it.
Right, so interesting. So for podcasters, I think what I'm hearing is as you build your audience, you should then also figure out or understand what your goals are going to be in the future so that then you tailor your audience to whether it's buying tickets or whatever it is, then you figure that out and work backwards.
Yes.
Okay, so theater, I know you're doing a lot of theater. I know you've done podcasting, television. Is there a place for visual and sound, especially for theater? I feel like theater is very, well, visual, of course. But then what happens with like sound elements and all of that? Do they play a role in your storytelling at all?
Yes, actually, sound and lighting, very, very important. You cannot just put a show on stage with a set and all of these things, and you don't do sound design or lighting design because storytelling requires those things. For you to be able to visually enjoy the story and the set that's been built and moving with the times of the stories, then light and sound plays a very, very big role.
Okay, so how, because you've been a podcaster,
Yes.
how do you translate your building of storytelling in like 12 for Birds for theater into podcasting? What are the things you feel like would apply on both sides?
Well, for sound design, first of all, I think one of the things that we take for granted, clarity of sound. Like the clarity of sound is so important. The clarity of soundtracks, because if you're going to tell a suspenseful story, for example, how do we get there? How does the suspense sound like? You have to create that through sound design. So it applies on stage, on screen, and even on podcasting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do. Okay,
Yes.
sorry, I didn't mean to that. But when building stories, right, what are some of the challenges that you have faced, and how do you overcome them? So you've done your research, it's time to do stage, you're talking about how some things are still coming up. How do you then, forgive me for using this word, pivot? How do you then make the changes?
The real capitalistic.
Yeah, I'm like,
lingo.
how else will you know I have been at
But,
work at any point unless I use the word pivot? But how do you pivot then
Two
with your
things.
stories?
Two things. Money first. There's a difficulty, like comparing to coming from TV and then straight into stage. No one prepared me for what that transition would look like. I was used to being on television with a budget, transport provided. All I needed was to appear on set or write whatever script I was writing. But then on the other side, producing for stage. And first, I think the first thing I realized before I started producing for stage, I was doing media and PR for Too Early for Birds. And I was like, I feel like this show is too big for just one weekend run, for just one day run. If the tickets are being bought, we're selling out in exactly 4 hours. We have no business doing just one show. So
Right.
so coming from TV, the one thing TV taught me was to constantly scale as long as there's a need for scaling. So that's one of the things that I was really hoping to do with Too Early for Birds and did. And it also meant more money. But the other thing that no one prepared me for was that when we do the research, Kenya is not really good at archiving. KBC, the KBC library, before you access it, is a whole story. Getting information out of the archives is a whole other story. Like, for us to be able to tell these stories, there's so many other hurdles than just money. So I think, well, money is a big player, because even these hurdles that we were facing sometimes we kwamua them with money. So I think money is the ultimate. But for the longest, we financed Too Early for Birds with ticketing money. So we run the production, pre-production, sometimes from our pocket, and then after we recoup the ticketing, and that's why our marketing is so aggressive, because we have to recoup the money so that we can be able to pay suppliers and the actors and crew. Yeah.
But that says a lot about you and the team, in that people are willing to do the work with you before, well, not before, at least getting deposits, but also the belief in your product, where you're going to do a show before you have money for the show. I think that's crazy, but I mean, that's amazing also to hear. But you talked about thinking about Too Early for Birds in different ways. Are there other ways that you want to do it other than stage? Or I know we're talking earlier and you're talking about how it came from TV.
Yeah.
Is that something you're interested in? Are there other ways that you're able to get money into the space? And what does scaling look like? Because you said you were able to scale. What does that actually look like?
Okay. So initially, for those who do not know, when we started Too Early for Birds, and it was at the cafe at All Saints Cathedral, Abu and Ngatia came and pitched to me at the cafe, and they were like, yo, so we have this brilliant idea. We want to do this TV show, but we want it to be just 15 minutes long, so that you can have it as an insert, maybe 15 minutes before the news or 15 minutes after the news. And they were like, since you're in the world of TV, how about you produce it, we'll do the scripting, we'll do everything else, you produce it and pitch it to different TV stations. And I was like, cool, right up my alley, let's do this. And it was a one-day shoot, like the scripts were ready, it was a one-day shoot, we shot everything we needed. Then we started to shop the show into different free-to-air stations. And the disappointment from one TV station to the other just kept crushing us. But we were like, you know what? So we don't have to stop this dream here. Ngati and Abu suggested we can put this on stage. And I said, listen, I don't know anything about stage. You guys, all the best, but if you need me, you know where to find me.
Yeah.
And that was it. And then later on, they came back when they were doing the first show, and they were like, okay, fine. We're doing the first stage show, and we don't have a media and PR person. And because you just came from TV and you have all of these connections and all of these contacts, how about we use you to get to the free-to-air stations for our media tour? And I was like, cool. And it was easy, like it was just phone calls, and it was like, oh, you guys, you have an interview at Capitol, you have an interview here. And it worked out, right? And then Brazen came, and they asked me to produce Brazen, because I'd been in the team for so long. I had seen everything as it happened, as it grew, as it changed.
Yeah.
I was right there. So it's the Brazen show, all women, written by women, produced by women, crew was women, everything was done by women. And we tried as much as possible in our marketing strategy to do all our interviews at women-led shows. And it was really good. It was an amazing turnout. So I remember the night before we started production, and we were having a conversation about doing a Friday show and a Saturday show. And I was doing the math, and I'm like, we're not gonna break even. If we're going to pay people fairly, we have to do more shows. And I don't think the people who were working on the production had done 5 shows before. But then I showed them how to break it down, and we're like, so we're gonna do this on Friday, these 2 shows on Saturday, and these 2 shows on Sunday. And this is what it means money-wise. And so, of course, everyone is on the side of money. No one is gonna say no. So we agreed, and we started rehearsals. And when we were doing, I remember when we were doing the media run, and one time we just come, I can't remember if we had come from Hot 96, and we sat at a Java to have breakfast, and the ticketing company said, all tickets are sold out. And this was like a week or 2 weeks to the show. And we're in disbelief, because the first thing was that we had shot too far from what we thought we were.
Yeah.
But also our audience didn't fail us, and they showed us that there's more. Like, if we wanted to, we could have still pulled another 5 shows, and I think it would have still sold out.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Your audience is everything, guys. I know you can translate that into podcasting.
It's the only thing.
They're everything.
Yes.
Yeah, so your audience is everything. As you plan your shows, as you do your podcasts, make sure you're thinking about your audience. Don't change who you are for your audience.
No.
But your audience finds you, like Gadon is telling us. Now, audience feedback, right? For podcasters, we're always trying to figure out what is it our audience wants, how do we adjust, how are you able to do that for your shows, and how does that affect your storytelling?
First things first, we've constantly had feedback from before we started putting out Google Forms where people could just give us information, or they could just DM us on Twitter or Instagram and Facebook. We constantly have information for when we do a show. Like, there's so much feedback coming in. But I know before we did the Brazen show, there had been a lot of conversations about, oh, how comes there are never stories about women? Oh, how comes the production is just always a lot of men? And it's not that it's not a balanced production. It's that most of the times the people you see who are doing a lot of the heavy lifting are men. And so we're like, you know what? A Brazen and all-women show is not a bad idea. And Alea, Laura, and Mora were graceful enough to write a beautiful script. And we got where we got to, and it worked.
So what do you use to get feedback from your audience?
So social media, heavily. We're hoping to start doing emails this year. But when we are announcing a show, the first thing we do is our first ever fans, whose emails we have. Those are the first people that we email. And but you can reach us. We get our information via DMs or social media platforms, and then we do Google Forms as well.
Okay, so
Yeah.
Google Forms to people after the show?
Yes, and sometimes, and most times, they're very user-specific. So your experience as you come into the auditorium, watching the show, timings, what you thought about the history or the story told. And the funny part is there's an audience that actually comes with notebooks and they write down the dates that we say to just go and confirm if we're actually right or not. So there's a different type of audience at Too Early for Birds, and we try as much as possible to be able to accommodate them all because they exist.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we can use Google, Instagram, or whatever social media platform. Why emailing? Like, I know you've spoken about emailing, but why would you go into emailing? Why is that something you want to grow into?
So I think it's very important to treat yourself as an audience member of the product that you produce or that you make. If it says, if I open my laptop and the first thing I do is open my emails, if you're not advertising or talking to me on email as a product that I consume, then what are you doing? If my first newspaper is emails, the emails that are not finding me well, let at least be one from Too Early for Birds that's finding you well, right? So, and it's that transition of knowing that I have grown to be a woman who's in the office who will open her laptop every other time to check emails. So put that email in there, introduce newsletters as well, and also knowing that email gives you a chance to be more detailed as compared to social media, TikTok, Twitter, and all of this other stuff.
Yeah,
X.
you're right. Because also I have a podcast with my sisters, and a lot of times, even though we ask for feedback, a lot of people prefer to write us emails. I think also because it doesn't have like the limitation of like 140 characters or whatever it is. You'll find someone who's like, hi, and then they'll tell you on episode 1, this happened and I thought this, and then episode 2, and then when this person said this, and so they're just there telling you so much. But I think I had never thought about it because I feel like when you're growing up, you're told emails made to sound old.
Yeah.
But you're
They're
right.
actually very efficient. They're
Yeah,
very efficient.
and if it's the thing that we all do, not being found well, we might as well use
Be
it
found
for
by
our
one.
audience.
Yeah.
Yeah. One should find us well.
Yes.
Okay. When it comes to storytelling, what ethical considerations do you put into telling the story, especially when you're dealing with personal and sensitive subjects? So what is the thought behind the ethics of storytelling?
Okay, first things first, when we're telling stories about, say, Field Marshal Muthoni the late, the great, Tom Mboya, when we're telling stories like those, the first thing we do is reach out to their families so that they know that we're telling these stories, so that we also get their permission and their nod that, yes, they want this story told. And we're lucky we've never gotten a no.
That's going to be my next question.
We've never gotten a no, but it gives me so much joy that there's access to these families and they listen and they say yes. And I remember the last Tom Mboya show, half of Tom Mboya's family was in the auditorium. And after the show, they were crying backstage with us and saying how well we portrayed their father. And that means everything to us. So for us, the first ethical aspect of storytelling is to be able to reach the families of the stories we want to tell and let them know what we're trying to do.
Okay, and if you're doing research then, do they take, like, do you ask them for, when you've decided how the story will go, do you then get their input, or is it just permission at the beginning, hi, we want to tell this story?
So for parts of the conversation, when there's a yes, then they also become part of the research process. Because we have to make phone calls, we'll ask for pictures, we'll need all of these different things. The things that we'll find in our research, say a suitcase Tom Mboya owned, and if it's available for us to have on the show, then it's something we'd like to have. And so we have to talk to the family first before we can use it on stage. Yeah.
Okay. When it comes to storytelling and choosing your stories, do you feel any sort of responsibility to your audience on the subjects that you pick?
Oh.
So like for me in podcasting, what is the consideration I should have to my audience?
Well, are you entertaining them? Are you educating them? Are you being able to keep them there consistently? I think those are some of the most important parts of storytelling, that you're educating and you're entertaining constantly. So then that means that I'll constantly come back because I don't leave empty or I don't leave angry. And also the importance of telling true stories. Because already the way our world is set up, there's so much sensationalism. If you then become that person as well, you might as well become a gossip blogger because you're not telling stories anymore. Yeah, so I think it's very important to entertain and to educate.
Okay.
Yes.
Educate and entertain. What other things, like what is it that helps you determine whether or not you're educating? Is it the feedback that you get from the audience, or is it if you learn something during the process, then you feel like in relatability there'll be someone who didn't know what I just learned?
Learning first. And I said this, I think a week ago. As an artist, when you're putting out work, as a storyteller, be happy with the story first, as yourself, before you put it out to the audience, because you satisfy yourself first, and then then you're going to satisfy someone else. So that's the balance, that it pleases you first. And even in parts of research, like the way Kenyan history is set up, you will find a story about me, for example, in, say, 1963, but you'll also find me in another story, unrelated, a heavy story in 1973, 10 years later. Unrelated places and unrelated genres, but it's still Kenyan history. And so that the idea of learning those things as a producer or as part of the team that brings out the show is so fascinating. It's so amazing. And I remember at some point when I was starting to produce Too Early for Birds, I'd have conversations with my late grandmother, and she told me so many stories that also helped with part of the research for the shows.
Right.
And that, like the things I'd learn and go talk about with my team, and I realized, like, this is going to be so amazing even for the audience. If, as an audience of my grandmother, I feel this exhilarated, then for sure, if the people see it, they're going to love it. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sure there's a podcaster thinking, I have a talk podcast. I might be entertaining, but what does education look like for me? Because, like, I might not be speaking about something specific.
Okay.
I might not be talking about Kenyan history. It might not be something as big as that. It might be I sat down with my friends and we're discussing hot topics or whatever it is. What does that look like in the I am entertaining, but do I have to educate?
You know, education is it's not a straight line. Education could just be me teaching you how to tie your laces, and it's education. Like, it doesn't have to be deep. It does not have to be deep. I think education is a very linear line. Like, you can say you're entertaining, but in the process of sitting with your girlfriends to talk about something, someone will have an experience they talk about while you guys are laughing, and it actually reaches to someone and educates them. So I don't think there's a way to erase education when you're storytelling.
Okay, and if I'm doing something as basic as that, what's my responsibility in telling the story then? In terms of, like, ethics, is there ethics I should consider in that time?
Sensationalism has to go, bro. I think it's really taking away from what good stories are supposed to be. And we have so many good stories in this country. And I imagine if we all decided to just be true to our Kenyan selves and not any other thing, then I think we'd tell really beautiful stories. We don't even have to ever tell the story about the poor girl in the slum who's saved by the guy from Karen. Like, we don't ever have to tell those stories. There's so many stories we can tell about our country, about our families, even in the homes that we live in, that people are going to relate to, and not necessarily being shady about them. Yeah.
Okay, so in storytelling, it's not always, like, what I have as an idea is not necessarily what it is that will come out. So has there been an experience you've had where a story had to change very dramatically from where you are in conceptualization to, like, what we saw on stage?
Yes. But usually our problem is overwriting. So that's usually our biggest problem. And I remember, I think it was the Badasari show. and Abu and Ngatia have these big chunks of papers on a Friday, Friday opening night, that they're trying to memorize. And the director is telling them, it's too late for these lines. I understand you guys wrote them yesterday and you think they're important to this story, but I'm sorry I can't add them. And for like 2 hours, there's a standoff because they want these stories to be added. And they said the only thing they want is for the director to trust them to have their lines on stage. But the problem was that the show was gonna get longer. So which means parts of those stories needed to go. And they did. It was a struggle, and they did, but still turned out really good. And the thing about stage, though, is we're the ones telling you the story. So you'll never know which parts didn't make it, and you'll never know which parts like were removed. So it's a very tricky place, but it's also a very beautiful place because it tells me we have so many stories to tell, just not enough time and not enough mediums. Not enough mediums are allowing us to put out Kenyan stories.
Start a podcast. Okay. My last question to Gathoni before I come to you for any questions on storytelling that you'd like to ask her or myself. What is the number one thing what should I consider in order to put myself behind a story? Like, what's the one thing I should think about, feel, consider before I tell a story?
Do I love this story? Because loving and connecting yourself to the story makes it easier for you to tell it. You become one with the story. Then if today I was on stage, I saw Chadota here, if I put Chadota on stage today and I asked her to do her lines from the last show, she probably still has them because she loved the parts that she played. And just connecting with the story and loving it makes it the process much easier.
Connect with your stories. Thank you, Gathoni.
You're welcome.
I want to come to the audience now for any questions you might have, whether on storytelling or podcasting. Any questions? Hands up, please, if you have a question. Any questions? Okay, Andrew, I see you. Also, Kenyans, I love you. Mine is not a question, it's a comment. After the show, please. Okay? I love you guys so much. Hear me when I say I love you. But mine is not a question, not now. Okay? We just want questions now. Andrew, do you want to come? Oh, there's one there. Okay, perfect.
Thank you very much for sharing the tips on storytelling. It's very humbling. And I'm just wondering, you've mentioned that the audience is everything, and that's what even causes people to come and want more. So the question is, when is the next edition for Too Early for Birds? And can we get it beyond stage? Because if our schedule does not align with that time, we'd live it on TV. And like you said, people are willing to pay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Andrew. So there's going to be a show this year, hopefully. We haven't set a date yet, but we're going to have a show this year. We're also transcending into screen. We're going to have versions of the show on screen as well. And we're also going to have a podcast soon. So be on the lookout for all of those things.
And you should host it on AfriPods. Thank you. Yeah. Any other questions from anyone?
Oh, there's one there.
Oh, hey, guys.
Hey.
Hi.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So my question is, in the era of AI, sorry, in the era of AI, what's the role of the artist? And is there a space for artists in the future? And in research, especially for maybe African concepts, AI is not, our stories are not told very well online. So what's the role of artists in the AI space? And will it affect how our content is made or how our content is consumed? Thank you.
Thank you. So I think I'm a very big fan of change digitally. Like I have never fought any digital change, any type of innovation by the internet. And if it comes to make my life as an artist easier, oh, well and good, I'm taking it in. I think there's just a thin line between what the ethics of AI are at the moment and how, well, a lot of artists are scared that AI is going to phase them out. I don't think so, because for you to be able to create anything on AI, you have to be human first to be able to generate all the prompts. So your AI is as good as you are as an artist. So I think they blend so well together, and it's going to make our life much easier. Yes.
I think also when it comes to how content will be made or consumed for the African creative, I think it's to our advantage that AI exists because, again, our stories have not yet been told. So if AI is coming in to make it easier for us to tell our stories, then there's an ease in who's able to tell the stories, how we're able to edit, those kind of things. Because if you consider majority of our population is still rural, so if they're going to grow up in a space where AI is a thing, then it's not necessary for that child to learn how to edit if there's going to be something that they can type in and edit, which means it makes it easier for our stories to be told, it makes it faster for us to do our production and everything. So I don't know that there's necessarily a disadvantage. Also, like Gathoni has mentioned, AI learns from us. They don't have enough to learn about us yet. It's still very dependent on us to tell our stories. So as an African artist, as an African creative, AI is only your friend. It can never be anything else at the moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
My question is, are there stories you didn't ask permission to bring to life? And if you are passionate about a story and you actually got a no, would you listen to that no, or would you just go on and like air out the story?
Well, there's so many stories we didn't have to ask for permission to tell. There's a story, Badasari was a story about the baddest thieves we've ever had in this country. How would you even start to go to their families and tell them, Cheki, tunajua mtoto wenyu alikuwa mwizi, so we'd like to tell their story. I think also it's about reading the room. There's a story we told about the Battle of Lumboka. The Battle of Lumboka is basically a battle where Kenyans from Luhyaland built forts. You know, like the forts from Game of Thrones? They built forts, and they were able to hold the white man the whole day, and they couldn't get through. So stories like those, we don't need permission from anyone. In fact, we want to tell those type of stories so that you know that it's not just the Kikuyu who fought for independence. Other tribes also fought for independence, but for the longest time, our history has been so whitewashed. It's been told from the white man's perspective. It's been told from the thief's perspective. So we never really get the true story, and that's why these stories that we tell are so, so important. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
Hello, Queen.
Hey.
And the other Gathoni.
Hi.
Mine is not a question. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Chukweli your mic.
I have two questions.
Okay.
My name is Musa, and Too Early for Birds focuses on Kenyan history. So I want to understand how important is that cultural authenticity and representation in storytelling, in podcasting especially? And the second question is, and I like the question on AI, so what are the emerging trends in storytelling for the future? Where do you see the future of storytelling in podcasting heading? And are there any emerging trends and innovations that particularly excite you?
I feel like I've forgotten the first question.
Cultural authenticity
Okay.
in your
okay.
storytelling.
So for that part of storytelling, one thing you will learn as you go through our history is that the more things change, the more they remain the same. There was a maize scandal at some point before this maize scandal.
Be careful what you say, madam. We're going to disappearing.
Tutaanza hashtag, msiogope. I fear nothing. But yeah, I think it's very important for purposes of the future, the past, and the children that are coming especially. We have to constantly remind ourselves and remind the next generation what our cultures are, what our history is, how we got where we are, what our ancestors, our great-great-grandparents did for us to be able to sit here freely, and we don't have to worry about we have to be home by 8 p.m. Or for us to move around Nairobi, we have to have a pass. Like, for us to be able, the continuity of our stories is fully dependent on the stories that we continue to tell. So if we forget our history, then we're failing the next generation. So I think that's my answer for that question. You want to take the other one?
No, I agree with you completely. I feel like sometimes the disadvantage we have is we've not been allowed to determine what part of our histories were okay or what part of our history was right for us. We've been told what part of our history we should accept. So I think it's important the space you're creating, because it allows us to, I'm not saying our history is all good, but it allows us to pick what we want as our good, not to have someone else predetermine for us what was right for us to accept. On emerging trends with AI and storytelling, I feel like now it's still very tech heavy. It's allowing for voices on AI for the people who, like, it's giving accessibility. So for the differently able to be able to come in. So if it's like someone's trying to do a podcast, but they're blind, how are we able to allow them access to whatever it is? If it's someone who's hard of hearing, again, I never know what correct terms are, so forgive me. Right. So if someone in the hard of hearing community is trying to do a podcast and they want to do something that we can understand, then AI voices are a thing that is possible. Or if it's editing, there's places like Riverside, which is what we use to do our podcast, that allow us like now to edit for social media. So then you're not worried about how many people in the team are there. Do I have to have a social media person? What is editing? I know at AfriPods we're building something that's AI related, that because one of our focuses is like broadcast to podcast. So it's like from radio stations coming into podcasting. So it's an AI tool that will allow you to figure out where the music is so that it's easier for you to edit. Again, I feel like what it is that AI is doing or technology is doing is just making it easier and faster for us to tell our stories. So at the moment, that's all it's doing. We will figure out as we go, because AI changes every day.
Yeah.
I see a question in the front. A lady in a yellow dress.
Hi, Gathonies.
Hi, Nyam.
Hi, now.
So I'm curious, in the work that I do, which is marketing focus, a lot of the times we have to tell stories, but that are of corporates, organizations, and I understand the humanizing of a human being, right?
Yeah.
Because I feel like it's easy to draw parallels there. So, I mean, there are things that we can think about in terms of the technical structure of thinking of it as a character and building those kinds of things. But I wanted to hear from you what tips you would give to build that kind of emotional engagement or connection with maybe a podcast around business entrepreneurship. Or, you know, if I'm in an agribusiness and agri-tech is my thing and I want to talk about stories in my podcast, what are some tips or some ways I can think about humanizing or building an emotional connection?
All right. I think, for example, like agribusiness, and this is not me being a pro, this is probably me just thinking through the answer. But I think, let's take an example of a cabbage, for example. There's, it's agribusiness, right? It's like Shamba Shape Up, for example, right? So for people who don't know, Shamba Shape Up is a TV show on Citizen TV about farming. Yes. So say a cabbage, for example. The journey of a cabbage doesn't start until the seed has been put in the ground, right? Well, what is that process of getting the seed and who's getting the seed? And so you use the things surrounding the cabbage to tell the story all the way to completion, or to when it becomes a plate in a Kikuyu home, to like you've humanized it.
Wow.
And you've journeyed with it from when it's a seed to where it ends up. So I think it's also just using the things that surround it to make it human. Yeah.
Amazing. Also, depending on who your audience is, I would say humanize the cabbage. Because maybe you're trying to teach children how to do farming, so the cabbage can have a voice. I mean, if you grew up in church when you were young, #VeggieTales, we all sang for the cucumber. And so you can be that guy also. I mean, it just depends on who your audience is.
True.
Yeah. I see
There's
a
another
question.
question.
Do we have any more questions?
Yes.
2 questions. Okay. I see 2 questions. Are there any others apart from the 2? Okay.
Hi, Jerry. And
N. Thank you.
And most of what you're talking about storytelling, I'm passionate about storytelling. My question is, I'm excited that the Too Early for Birds will transition from on set or on stage to Okay, let's pretend that you didn't hear me.
yes.
All right. Hi, Gathoni Q and Gathoni N.
Hi, Jerry.
I am really excited to have 2 Gathonis on speaking to us today, and also excited about storytelling. Storytelling is something that I'm very passionate about. My name is Jerry Wawagare, and I was, ululating at the back when I heard that Too Early for Birds will make a transition from on stage to podcasting. So my question is, are you going to pick the same elements that you had and move them, especially with the parts of the stories that were not included? Or are you going to look at it from a different perspective now that you're not squeezed for time? We have the time to listen to a 90-minute podcast. We don't mind as long as it's storytelling and it's done in a beautiful way, which I know that you guys can and will. So my question is, which aspects, and is that something that you're grappling with? Which aspects of the stories that had to be left out because it was going on stage that you will be able to bring in? I'll sneak in a second question very quickly. Thinking back to the onset of Too Early for Birds, for those who are not in the know, it was inspired by a blog that existed, and the stories now moved from the blog to the stage. And they didn't move from the blog to the stage in the same way that they did. You guys did a lot of research behind it. Now, there are stories that you're telling that were not necessarily on the blog. So my question is, are you thinking around collaboration with existing writers where this story is not only existing on stage, can exist as in form of long feature, reads, or something like that?
Okay, so I'm gonna answer in one long form to cover both questions. But the one thing which is an advantage and a disadvantage in our house is that with research comes so many beautiful, strong, extremely strong stories. And sometimes when we're choosing which ones to tell, we are also in pain that we left an even stronger story. But so that tells me that when we're doing the podcast and the other version of the screen show, we're still gonna tell the same stories, but in very different ways, considering that they're very different mediums. And in the process, we hope that we can be able to not only maintain the audience that comes to see us on stage, but to also get a new audience that loves podcasts, loves to watch things on screen. We haven't decided what model of screen we're gonna put it on, but we know it's coming. So I think, have I answered the second question?
I think about collaboration.
So for collaboration, the one thing we pride in at Too Early for Birds is to be able to work with people who are dreaming like we are. So at all times, we will reach out to as many people as possible who we collaborate with, who we intend to collaborate with. And that is also seen even on our stage shows, where we try our level best to always put new faces on stage, so that even for the purposes of the industry, it's not just the same people on stage shows or on screen shows. We try as much as possible to bring new faces always. So yes, collaborations will constantly happen, and we are reaching out to different people, whether it's to shoot or to write with us. That is happening as well. Yes.
Okay, one last question.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you also have one? Okay, two last questions, then we are done. So,
Hi, ladies.
Hi.
Thanks for sharing everything about podcasting storytelling. So I'm curious about the thought process around naming the final product. You've talked about having to navigate, deciding which stories to leave in and put in. So when you're coming up with like the final name, how do you come up with something that captures the essence of what you're trying to say, but still leaves enough mystery to grab people? So similar to the earlier question around the agribusiness, so I come from an NGO background, so you're trying to not say these are podcasts about agribusiness, but make it a bit more interesting. So I'm curious about that. And then just second, you talked about having an all-women show. So I'm curious for future editions if there are more demographics in terms of inclusion that you'd like to explore down the road. Thanks.
Okay. First of all, the name Too Early for Birds, every member of Too Early for Birds who was there when it was starting will give you a different reason why this show is called Too Early for Birds. But the long and short of it is, the blog we were getting our research from, or we were adapting the stories from, was called Too Late for Worms. So we just did that thing. So it's not that deep. But we were looking for a name, but before we could find a name, that was like a placeholder, and it stuck, and it worked. And I think with an audience, whatever name you come up with, your job is to actually make it sound like the best thing in the world. The audience does not get to decide if it's a good name or not. You're the one who teaches them to accept that it's a good name. You're the one who teaches the audience to accept that these are good stories. Well, you tell them well, but you have to tell them in a confidence that your audience is intrigued by, so then they become believable. Even the ones where you think, are we bullshitting? You know? But the way you've told them with so much confidence, they hold so much water. What was the next question? Yes, actually. We're exploring the TikTok demographic heavily going forward, because I believe, I saw a video of Kemani Mbogwa asking people on the street, young people, like maybe 18, 19, 20, if they know who Tomboya is. And the ahs and who? And for every that was said, it was like a stab in my chest. But it also made me realize, look at you, you have barely scratched the surface with your audience. So I think that's another platform that we're looking to do and to get into heavily, knowing very well that for us to be able to be accepted on TikTok, we have to be able to put out content that speaks to that demographic. So it simply is also gonna be very, almost high schoolish, but in a very fun way, so that then we can be able to get the younger generation. Yeah.
On naming, I feel like what you need to figure out is what is the essence of what you're trying to do, and then how you translate it doesn't become, as she's saying, that serious. I have a podcast called Okay Kiasi. When we were coming up with the name, I don't think we knew it would make sense with the podcast as much as it does. But if you listen to our podcast, it genuinely is like we are kind of okay. But that wasn't the idea when we were starting it. So I feel like just get an idea of what it is you're trying to do, make it fun, even if it's in the NGO space, and then people form a behavior and an idea around what it is you tell them. So if I tell you that light is green, even though you can see it's white, we become the green light squad. You know what I mean? So it can be that way. And then speaking for Twali for Birds and their inclusivity, even though I am not part of the team, I know that they've taken a lot of time and effort in ensuring that every possible community that is Kenyan representing is part of their show. So you'll see Asian, Indian, Kenyans, you know, those people
hyphenated communities.
Yeah, hyphenated, where people are just like, how Siwetu, they've taken time to include them in that. So it might not be as dramatic as the demographic of a full woman show, but I think they've taken time to include hyphenated, is that the way you say it? Hyphenated communities.
Yeah. Kenyan Somali, Kenyan Indians.
Yeah, in their teams, so that then everyone can somehow, even in the storytelling, relate to someone who's on stage. Yeah. Last question, I believe, is coming from Akinyi. And then we should be done.
Hi, Gadoni Squared.
Hi.
So my name is Awiti. I'm an award-winning podcaster from
Yes.
Kisumu, Kenya.
Yes. Let them know.
That's how you introduce yourself.
Yeah, I host a podcast called Unspoken Podcast. It's a podcast on personal development. So I've been doing podcasting since 2020. I guess this is my fifth year in podcasting. So in regards to storytelling, is it safe to say that a good story makes a good podcast? Is it safe to say that a good story makes a good podcast? But now I'm struggling with, I think, storytelling, because I'm at a point where like I release 2 episodes a week on Wednesday and on Sunday. So I feel like at times when I'm about to record, my head is like empty. I don't have like enough stories to tell. I feel like the episode is gonna be boring when I don't have stories that are gonna indulge with the topic I'm talking about. So how do I work with that?
Can I take? So I think one of the things that I'll talk about content creation, including storytelling, because content creation is also storytelling. But one of the biggest faults we have in the industry is to not write. We don't write. A lot of us don't write. We want to just get into the studio with a topic top of our head and start talking to the microphone. You have to write. You have to plan. Even if it's in point form, and say, we're talking about firstborns today and their personal development. Who is the firstborn that I know that I can invite to this podcast? What are we also going to talk about? How does that affect the storytelling aspects of my podcast? So you have to plan, you have to have a schedule of stories, so that even on the days that you don't feel like going into the studio, you have a ready script, you have a topic, and you have a guest. The rest you can always wing. Yes.
The other thing I say for a lot of creatives, I feel like we're afraid to take time away or to rest. Sometimes the reason why you don't have an idea is because you're tired, and that's okay. You need to rest. So maybe you need to take time off away from your podcast. Your audience will not faint, they will not die, they will not run away. It allows you to be able to take time to figure out what it is you want to talk about. Are you really giving them what it is that they're worth as your audience that you have grown? Because you don't give them half stories. If you're feeling like something's wrong, it means it'll translate to them. Because if they've been with you for 5 years, when you're not able to tell the story right, they're able to tell that you're not saying the story right. So maybe take time away, think about it, write notes. Anytime you get an idea, note it down somewhere. It might not be a full-blown idea, just scribble it, because that's what then you can go back to when it's now this time when you're like, I don't have anything. That's what you can go back to.
Yeah, and also as an artist and as a person who writes and as a person who gives myself in art form, it's also very important to know when you're at your best and take that time to batch shoot, so that if you're gonna be not okay for the next 3 weeks, you still have content for a month. So you batch shoot, and your downtime never affects the quality of your product. Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys, for being here. Gadoni, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Please tell the people where they can find you.
Oh, thank you, first of all, for coming, for showing up, bro. This thing was sold out in, wow. So thank you so much for the commitment. Thank you for coming. You can find me on X. X is not a real place, so sometimes when I'm going crazy, don't hold me accountable. But you can find me on X at Queen Gadoni. You can find me on Instagram at Queen Gadoni, and sometimes on TikTok same handle at Queen Gathoni. Yes.
Where can we find Too Early for Buds?
You can find Too Early for Buds on the same platforms. It's Too Early for, the number 4, Buds, on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok.
I like how you changed it back to Twitter, because when you said X, I was like, who? Which millennial?
I'm trying. I keep trying to not say X.
Thank you for being here. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. I am Gathoni. I am from AfriPods. You can follow us at AfriPods on all social media platforms. You can check us out. We offer free hosting for your podcast. Wherever you're hosted, come to us. We are better. You can check us out, afripods.africa. Again, free hosting. You can migrate, do whatever you need to do. And then my handle is Podcasting in Africa on Instagram. Follow me, ask me questions, whatever you need. Oh, I'm also a podcaster. My podcast is OK Kiasi at OK Kiasi everywhere. So thank you for being here. Thank you for making time. You guys are awesome. We're not chasing you. I don't know if Gathoni will still be around. Talk to each other. You know, ask each other, what's your podcast name?
I'm still here.
Gathoni is still here. The bar, restaurant, let me use the word restaurant, is still open. Tea. Dawas, I'm waiting for him to nod before I say something he doesn't have. And then also, if you want something strong, if you want to do, it's also there. So please enjoy yourself. And thank you guys so much for making the time to be here. Special thank you also to Semabox. We would not have this technical amazingness here. Do you see the lights? Do you see how we are looking cute? It's Semabox.
Yes,
they are an amazing podcast studio. You can check them out if you are trying to get your podcast done. They are the people who will get you looking cute and making your sound, you know, how you, if you want to be an award-winning podcaster, Semabox. Also, Baraza for hosting us so graciously. Thank you so much. We could not do this without you. And thank you everyone for being here. Bye, guys.
Bye.